The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Eldermere Palace as young Prince Alexander walked through the grand corridors. At only 12 years old, he carried himself with the grace expected of royalty, yet his eyes held a warmth that set him apart from the cold formality that often filled these ancient walls. Captain Thomas Hartwell had been standing at his post for over 6 hours. His legs ached, and sweat beaded beneath his ceremonial helmet, but he remained perfectly still. As the head of the palace guard, Thomas had served the royal family for 15 years, watching as little Prince Alexander grew from a toddler into the thoughtful young man who now approached. The prince paused in front of the massive portrait of his great-grandfather, King Edmund the Brave. Thomas had seen this routine countless times. The boy would study the painting for several minutes, as if trying to understand the weight of the crown that would someday rest upon his own head. "Captain Hartwell," the prince said softly, not turning from the portrait. "Yes, Your Highness," Thomas replied, maintaining his rigid posture. "Do you think great-grandfather was afraid when he became king?" Thomas hesitated. Royal protocol demanded formal responses, but something in the boy's voice suggested he needed honesty more than ceremony. "I believe all good leaders feel the weight of their responsibility, Your Highness. Fear can make us more careful with the trust others place in us." Prince Alexander finally turned, his green eyes meeting the captain's. "You've been standing here since dawn, haven't you?" "It is my duty, Your Highness. But you haven't eaten anything." Thomas was surprised the prince had noticed. "I will eat when my shift ends, Your Highness." The palace buzzed with its usual morning activity. Servants hurried past carrying silver trays, ministers discussed matters of state in hushed tones, and the distant sound of horses could be heard from the courtyard. Yet in this moment, the young prince seemed focused entirely on the man whose job it was to protect him. "May I ask you something, Captain?" "Of course, Your Highness." "When you were my age, what did you want to become?" Thomas smiled despite himself. "A knight, Your Highness. I wanted to be brave and honorable, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves." "And did you achieve your dream?" The captain's chest swelled with quiet pride. "I serve the crown and protect this realm. In many ways, yes, Your Highness." Prince Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Then you understand what it means to carry responsibility for others." Before Thomas could respond, commotion erupted from the servants' quarters. Raised voices echoed through the stone corridors, and both the prince and captain turned toward the sound. A young kitchen maid, no more than 16, ran past them with tears streaming down her face. "What's happening?" Prince Alexander asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Thomas straightened. "I should investigate, Your Highness." "I'll come with you." "Your Highness, perhaps it would be better—" "Captain, if I'm to rule these people someday, shouldn't I know what troubles them?" Thomas couldn't argue with such logic. Together, they followed the sounds of distress to the kitchen entrance, where a crowd had gathered. Master Chef Henri stood red-faced in the center, berating the same young maid who had run past them moments earlier. "Clumsy girl! Do you know what you've done?" Chef Henri's voice boomed through the stone chamber. "That was the china set meant for the ambassador's dinner tonight. Priceless pieces, and you've destroyed them." The maid, whose name was Sarah, cowered as Henri continued his tirade. Around them, other servants watched in uncomfortable silence. Thomas noticed several ladies-in-waiting whispering behind their hands, and even some of the junior guards seemed to enjoy the spectacle. "Please, sir," Sarah sobbed. "It was an accident. I was carrying too much, and I slipped on the wet stones. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Henri's face grew even redder. "Sorry won't replace centuries-old porcelain. You'll work for 10 years and never earn enough to pay for what you've broken." Prince Alexander watched the scene unfold, his hands clenched at his sides. Thomas could see the boy's jaw tighten as Henry's words grew crueler. "Perhaps she should be dismissed," one of the ladies-in-waiting suggested loudly. "Send her back to whatever hovel she came from." "Indeed," another agreed. "We can't have such carelessness in the palace." Thomas saw the exact moment when Prince Alexander's composure broke. Not in anger, but in something far more powerful, compassion that demanded action. "Enough," the prince said, stepping forward. The crowd parted as they noticed his presence. Chef Henri's face paled as he realized royalty had witnessed his outburst. "Your Highness," Henri stammered, bowing deeply. "I didn't see you there." "Clearly," Prince Alexander replied, his voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. "What happened here?" "A servant broke valuable china, Your Highness. I was just—" "You were humiliating someone who made an honest mistake," the prince interrupted, "in front of the entire staff." Sarah looked up through her tears, surprised to find the prince defending her. Thomas watched with growing pride as the boy he'd helped protect all these years showed the kind of character that couldn't be taught, only nurtured. "Your Highness," one of the ladies-in-waiting spoke up, "surely you understand the importance of discipline among the servants." Prince Alexander turned to her with eyes that seemed far older than his 12 years. "I understand the importance of justice, Lady Margaret. I also understand the difference between discipline and cruelty." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual sounds of the palace seemed to pause, as everyone waited to see what the young prince would do next. Thomas felt a surge of emotion he hadn't experienced since the day he first swore his oath to the crown. This wasn't just a boy learning to be a prince. This was a future king learning what it truly meant to lead with honor. The story was far from over, and Thomas sensed that whatever happened next would change something fundamental in the palace. The prince's next words would either reinforce the harsh hierarchy that governed their world or challenge it in a way that would ripple through every stone corridor of Eldermere Palace. As Prince Alexander looked from the tearful maid to the expectant faces surrounding them, Thomas realized he was about to witness something that would define not just this moment, but the kind of ruler this young man would become. Prince Alexander stepped closer to Sarah, who still knelt among the scattered pieces of broken china. The delicate blue and gold fragments sparkled like fallen stars against the gray stone floor. Each piece told a story of craftsmanship from generations past, and their destruction seemed to echo through the sudden quiet of the kitchen. "Stand up, please," the prince said gently to Sarah. The young maid looked up in confusion, her face streaked with tears. "Your Highness?" "I said stand up. You shouldn't kneel because of an accident." Sarah rose shakily to her feet, still clutching the silver tray she had been carrying. Around them, the crowd watched in stunned silence. This was not how things were supposed to go. Servants made mistakes, they were punished, and life moved on. Royal children were not supposed to intervene in such matters. Chef Henri cleared his throat nervously. "Your Highness, perhaps we should let the staff handle this matter. Such things are beneath your concern." Prince Alexander turned to face the chef, and Thomas noticed how the boy's posture straightened. Despite his young age, there was something unmistakably regal in the way he carried himself. "Chef Henri, how many people work in this kitchen?" 23, Your Highness." "And how many meals do they prepare each day?" Henri looked puzzled. "Nearly 1,000, Your Highness, for the royal family, staff, guards, and visiting dignitaries." 1,000 meals, Prince Alexander repeated thoughtfully. "That's quite a lot of work. Tell me, in your 15 years as head chef, have you ever broken anything?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Henry's face cycled through several expressions before settling on uncomfortable honesty. "Well, yes, Your Highness. Once or twice." "And were you dismissed for it?" "No, Your Highness, but that's different. I How is it different? Thomas watched this exchange with growing amazement. The prince was not just showing mercy, he was teaching a lesson that none of them would forget. The captain had seen many nobles in his time, some kind, some cruel, most simply indifferent to those beneath them. But he had never seen someone so young display such wisdom. Lady Margaret stepped forward, her silk dress rustling against the stone. "Your Highness, surely you understand that servants must be held to certain standards. We cannot allow carelessness to go unpunished." "Lady Margaret, may I ask about your jewelry?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Lady Margaret touched her necklace unconsciously. "My jewelry, Your Highness." "That ruby necklace you wear, it's quite beautiful. Did it belong to your grandmother?" "Yes, Your Highness. It's been in my family for generations." "And have you ever lost an earring? Dropped a ring? Perhaps broken a bracelet clasp?" Lady Margaret's cheeks flushed pink. Well, once or twice. But you weren't cast out of your family for it, were you?" The silence that followed was so complete that Thomas could hear his own heartbeat. Prince Alexander had, with just a few simple questions, exposed the hypocrisy that everyone felt, but no one had dared to voice. Sarah watched this exchange with wide eyes, hardly believing that someone was defending her. In her 16 years, she had learned that people like her, the poor, the powerless, were expected to be perfect while their betters were forgiven their human frailties. Prince Alexander walked over to where the broken china lay scattered. He knelt down and carefully picked up one of the larger pieces, part of a saucer with an intricate painted rose. The gold trim caught the light from the tall windows. "Captain Hartwell," he said without looking up, "what do you know about this china set?" Thomas stepped forward. "It was a wedding gift to your great-great-grandmother, Your Highness, from the Emperor of Celestia. It has been in the palace for nearly 200 years. 200 years, the prince repeated, examining the fragment. "Do you think, Captain, that in 200 years this was the first piece that was ever broken?" Thomas smiled despite himself. "I would doubt that very much, Your Highness." "So would I." Prince Alexander stood, still holding the broken piece. "Sarah, please look at me." The maid raised her eyes to meet his. "How long have you worked in the palace?" 3 months, Your Highness," she whispered. "And before that?" "I lived in Millbrook Village with my grandmother. She took sick and we needed the money for medicine." "Is she better now?" Fresh tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "She passed last month, Your Highness." A collective intake of breath rippled through the watching crowd. Suddenly, this wasn't just about broken china anymore. Prince Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle, but carried clearly through the kitchen. "Sarah, I want you to know that your grandmother would be proud of you. You came here to take care of someone you loved. You work hard every day to honor her memory. That matters far more than any piece of china, no matter how old or valuable it might be." Thomas felt his throat tighten. Around him, he could see others being similarly affected. Even some of the ladies-in-waiting looked moved by the prince's words. "But, Your Highness," Chef Henri protested weakly, "the cost—" "The cost will come from my personal allowance," Prince Alexander announced. "Every penny of it." Gasps echoed through the kitchen. A prince's allowance was meant for his own needs: clothing, books, riding equipment, small luxuries befitting his station. For him to give it all up for a servant's mistake was unprecedented. "Your Highness," Thomas said carefully, "that's very generous, but perhaps—" "Captain, my father often tells me that with privilege comes responsibility. I have the privilege of living in this palace, of having more than I could ever need. Doesn't that make me responsible for ensuring that everyone who works here is treated with dignity?" Thomas felt a pride so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. This boy, This extraordinary young man was going to be a king unlike any who had come before him. Furthermore, Prince Alexander continued, addressing the entire crowd, I want everyone to understand something clearly. Sarah will continue working here, and she will be treated with the same respect as any other member of our staff. If I hear of anyone making her feel unwelcome because of this incident, they will answer to me personally. The authority in his voice was unmistakable. Despite his youth, every person present understood that this was not a request. It was a royal decree. Sarah began to cry again, but these were different tears. Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you so much. Don't thank me, Sarah. Just continue to work hard and treat others with the same kindness you would want them to show you. As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves about what they had witnessed, Thomas remained beside the prince. He watched as the young man carefully placed the broken china fragment on a nearby table, handling it as gently as if it were still whole. Your Highness, Thomas said quietly, what you did today, it was remarkable. Prince Alexander looked up at him with those wise green eyes. Captain, do you remember what you told me about being a knight? About protecting those who can't protect themselves? Yes, Your Highness. Today you taught me that protection isn't just about swords and armor. Sometimes it's about making sure people are treated fairly. Thank you for that lesson. Thomas felt his eyes grow damp. In that moment, he knew that serving this young prince, watching him grow into the man he was becoming, would be the greatest honor of his life. In the weeks that followed the incident in the kitchen, Eldermere Palace seemed to transform. The change was subtle at first, like the way morning light gradually fills a room, but Thomas noticed it in countless small moments. Servants walked with their heads held a little higher. Conversations in the corridors carried notes of warmth rather than fear. Sarah had become something of a symbol among the staff, not of carelessness, but of second chances and royal mercy. She worked harder than ever, and Thomas often saw her teaching newer servants the safest ways to handle valuable items, turning her mistake into wisdom for others. Prince Alexander continued his daily walks through the palace, but now staff members would smile and nod respectfully rather than shrinking against the walls. The boy had a remarkable memory for names, and Thomas watched with pride as the prince asked after sick relatives, remembered birthdays, and showed genuine interest in the lives of people most nobles never even noticed. The impact extended beyond the servants' quarters. The story of the prince's intervention had spread throughout the kingdom, carried by visiting dignitaries, traveling merchants, and letters between noble houses. Songs were being sung in village taverns about the young prince who defended a kitchen maid. Children in the countryside played games where they pretended to be Prince Alexander, standing up for those in need. Thomas found himself changed as well. His 15 years of service had taught him to maintain professional distance, to be a guardian rather than a confidant. But watching Prince Alexander's natural compassion had rekindled something in the captain's heart, a reminder of why he had wanted to become a knight in the first place. One evening, as autumn painted the palace gardens in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas received an unexpected summons to the prince's private study. He found Prince Alexander sitting by the window, reading a leather-bound book about the great kings of history. Captain Hartwell, please sit, the prince said, gesturing to a comfortable chair near the fireplace. Thomas hesitated. Your Highness, it wouldn't be proper. Captain, we're alone here. I'm asking you as someone who values your counsel, not commanding you as your prince. Thomas took the offered seat, noting how the firelight played across the young man's thoughtful features. At 12, Prince Alexander was already showing signs of the handsome man he would become. But it was his character that truly set him apart. I've been thinking about something, Prince Alexander said, closing his book and setting it aside. About the day in the kitchen and what happened afterward. It was an extraordinary display of leadership, Your Highness. Was it? Or was it simply what any decent person should do? Thomas considered his words carefully. Your Highness, in my experience, power often reveals character. Some people use their authority to lift others up, while others use it to keep them down. What you did that day showed everyone who you really are. Prince Alexander was quiet for a moment, staring into the dancing flames. Captain, may I share something with you? Something I've never told anyone? Of course, Your Highness. Sometimes I lie awake at night, thinking about the crown I'll inherit someday. It's terrifying, knowing that people's lives will depend on my decisions. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I become one of those kings who history remembers as cruel or foolish? Thomas leaned forward slightly. Your Highness, the very fact that you worry about such things tells me you'll never be that kind of king. How can you be so certain? Because cruel kings don't lose sleep over the welfare of kitchen maids. They don't give up their allowances to spare someone else's feelings. They don't ask their guards whether they've eaten. Prince Alexander looked up in surprise. You remember that? I remember everything about that day, Your Highness. Your compassion, your courage, your wisdom. But mostly I remember how proud I felt to serve someone like you. The prince's eyes grew bright. Captain, I need to ask you something important. Anything, Your Highness. In 5 years, when I come of age and begin taking on more royal duties, would you consider becoming my personal advisor? Not just my guard, but someone I can trust to tell me the truth, even when it's difficult to hear? Thomas felt his heart swell with emotion. It was an incredible honor, the kind of position men spent their entire careers hoping to achieve. But as he looked at this remarkable young man, he realized something that surprised him. Your Highness, I am deeply honored by your offer. Truly. But I think my greatest service to you might be something different. Prince Alexander tilted his head curiously. What do you mean? Your Highness, you have something that cannot be taught or learned from books. You have a natural empathy that makes you a true leader. But there are others in this kingdom who need that kind of leadership more urgently than the palace does. I don't understand. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out over the vast gardens and the villages beyond. The eastern provinces have been struggling with bandits for months. The mountain communities need someone they can trust to help rebuild after last winter's harsh storms. There are places where people have lost faith in the crown's protection. Prince Alexander joined him at the window. You want to leave the palace? I want to serve the kingdom in a different way, Your Highness. You've reminded me that being a knight isn't just about standing guard in marble halls. Sometimes it's about going where the need is greatest. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Captain, Prince Alexander said finally, if this is truly what you want, then you have my blessing. But know that you'll always have a place here should you choose to return. Thank you, Your Highness. That means everything to me. There's one condition, though. Thomas turned to face the prince. Your Highness, you have to promise to write to me. I want to hear about the people you help, the problems you solve. Your experiences will help me understand what my future subjects truly need. Thomas smiled, thinking of how perfectly this request captured everything wonderful about Prince Alexander's character. Even in letting him go, the young prince was thinking about how to become a better leader. I promise, Your Highness. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, Thomas prepared to leave Eldermere Palace. His horse was saddled and waiting in the courtyard, his belongings packed in simple traveling bags. Word of his departure had spread throughout the palace, and staff members lined the corridors to bid him farewell. Sarah was among them, wearing the smile that had become her trademark since the incident with the china. She pressed a small wrapped package into his hands. "What's this?" Thomas asked. "Honey cakes for your journey, Captain. Made with the recipe my grandmother taught me. Thank you, Sarah. Take care of yourself." "I will, Captain. Thanks to Prince Alexander, I know I'm valued here." As Thomas led his horse through the grand entrance, he found Prince Alexander waiting for him. The young man had grown several inches in recent months, and his shoulders were beginning to broaden, but his eyes held the same warmth and wisdom that had first impressed the captain. "Captain Heartfelt," Prince Alexander said formally, "for your years of faithful service to the crown, and in recognition of your continued dedication to the kingdom's welfare, I hereby grant you the title of Knight Protector of the Eastern Provinces." Thomas dropped to one knee. "Your Highness, I am deeply honored." "Rise, Sir Thomas. You've earned this honor through your character, not your service to me." As Thomas mounted his horse, Prince Alexander stepped closer. "Sir Thomas, remember what you taught me about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Go show the kingdom what true knighthood looks like." Thomas saluted one final time. "Your Highness, remember what you taught me about leading with compassion. When you become king, the realm will be blessed indeed." As Thomas rode through the palace gates and onto the road that would take him to his new life, he carried with him the memory of a 12-year-old prince who had shown more wisdom and kindness than most adults ever managed. Behind him, Prince Alexander stood in the courtyard until the rider disappeared from sight. The young prince had learned that sometimes the greatest acts of leadership involved letting good people go where they could do the most good. Years later, when Prince Alexander ascended to the throne, his kingdom would be known throughout the world for its justice and compassion. Historians would debate the sources of his extraordinary character, but those who knew him best understood the truth. Greatness had recognized greatness, and in that recognition, both a future king and a true knight had found their calling. The palace was forever changed, not by grand gestures or royal decrees, but by the simple understanding that every person, regardless of their station, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. And in the villages where Sir Thomas rode, helping the forgotten and protecting the vulnerable, that same lesson spread like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, touching lives in ways that would echo through generations.